Hello ladies and gentlemen and welcome to the Film Brits podcast. I'm your host Trilbee, the Gandalf the Grey of film criticism, because this podcast is never late, nor is it early. It arrives exactly when it means to. And yeah, there was no podcast last week, mainly because of just my schedule just got massively out of control, because for those of you who are patrons, you may already know this, I tend to let my patrons know things a lot earlier than other people generally do, but basically I was working for a couple of weeks on Series 2 of The Question Jury, which is a Channel 4 game show which is filmed in Manchester, and then I immediately hopped on to the BBC upcoming talent show Let It Shine. And for those of you who don't know, Let It Shine is basically a talent show in the vein of How Do You Solve a Problem Like Maria, or I'd Do Anything, you know, when they're trying to cast a musical, because Gary Barlow and Take That, they're working on a musical stage production using Take That songs. It's not exactly a Take That life story, it's just sort of like We Will Rock You, the Queen musical, where it's its own original story, but it uses music from Queen, and they're trying to cast that, and I worked a couple of days on that. Normally hate talent shows, and even though I enjoyed working on it, it kind of also solidified why I do not like talent shows, but that's a rant for another time. But anyway, that's basically why I've not been able to do the podcast for the past week. So let's just jump right into the podcast and just make up for lost time, really. I'll still be doing all of the segments such as Share the Love. Now for this week, Share the Love, well, this is the first podcast that I've done since the whole America basically lost its shit, and I'm just going to say, I'm not going to I don't really get too political on this podcast. I tend to do that on my Facebook, on my Twitter, or whatever, but I'll try and leave this podcast a relatively political free zone as much as I can, because, you know, films and entertainment and media, it's inherently political. Like, you can't avoid it no matter how hard you try, and I think it would be dishonest to avoid it. But I just want to say that there's a lot of negativity, there's a lot to be worried about, there's a lot of people who are very uncertain and they don't really know where they stand, but I just want everybody to know that you are welcome, no matter what your race, sexuality, gender, no matter who you are a welcome listener. I will be fighting in your corner if need be, and I just want you to know that I will fight your battles if I need to, and I'm looking out for you, and I wish you all of the best. So, with that out of the way, share the love, let's be more positive, and let's just go to a bunch of people who absolutely need no introduction, because this is a YouTube channel that I've been following for a very, very long time. Now, I'm not here to say that I'm supporting the little guy, because this is a massive channel, 2.3 million subscribers, but I just figured that I might as well just throw some love to them, because I just absolutely love almost everything that they do. This is Team 4-Star. Now, they've been part of YouTube for like nearly 10 years now, doing Dragon Ball Z parody videos, and basically they jumped early onto the abridged train on YouTube, because Little Karibo did Yu-Gi-Oh! The abridged series, and Team 4-Star, they took inspiration from that, and they made their own Dragon Ball Z related abridged series. And for those of you who don't know, abridging is when you take normally an animated show, because it's a lot easier to lip sync, it's a lot easier to edit and do your own animations on top of it in order to make it a almost entirely new show. And abridging means you make it shorter, you condense it, you do your own dialogue, and you do your own voice acting and your own sound effects and such. And what Team 4-Star do is that they take Dragon Ball Z, the anime, and they abridge it. They make it shorter, they add a lot of jokes, and it's possibly not possibly, it is the best abridged series on the internet, like bar none. And when I say that a potential other great abridged series like Hellsing Abridged or Abridged on Titan, they're done by the same people. Team 4-Star are an incredible abridging machine of an organisation, if you can call them that, because they've got a Patreon where they fund their own studio, and they do things about as professionally as you can in an online fan fiction space. I guess you could call it fan fiction. It's a fan-based non-profit abridged series where they make their revenue from t-shirt and merchandising sales from their own original jokes and their own original products, and as well as their Team 4-Star Gaming, where they often play video games in character as the people who they voice. And the voice cast, they got Masako X, Lana Pator, Kaiser Neko, Takahata 101, and numerous other people who get involved. And it's It is incredibly funny. I just want to stress that Dragon Ball Z Abridged is an incredibly funny series. But it's also incredibly well written. Like, they have... one thing that I'm not a big fan of Yu-Gi-Oh! The Abridged series. Now, I watch it and I laugh, but it is very much in the vein of let's just make fun of the subject matter. Let's just make jokes. Let's not really follow any sort of plot like the anime did, which is fair enough. It's what they want to do, and it's what they're good at. But Team 4 Star, they actually adapt the material, they rewrite it, they actually acknowledge and fix some of the plot holes in the material. And they have recurring jokes, they have incredibly well thought out arcs for the characters, and they even have a couple of really dramatic moments that really, really work, and some really clever badass lines. And I think the villains in Dragon Ball Z Abridged are better than the villains in the actual program. They're much more intimidating and much more smartly written. I think it is just an incredibly well done production. They're about 56 episodes in, and they've done numerous abridging of some of the Dragon Ball Z movies. They've done abridging on Hellsing, Attack on Titan, and they've also got a gaming channel. They do some original music. Just full disclosure while I remember, Il Nige and Stephen Krosek do some music and animation respectively for Dragon Ball Z Abridged, and I've not worked directly with them, but I have worked on the same website as them, geekvision.tv. Like, it's hardly a conflict of interest, but I just figured I'd disclose that. But yeah, Team 4 Star do incredible work. I can't wait to see what they do next with the franchise. They're currently about... they're near the Cell games, if that means anything to Dragon Ball Z fans. If you are a Dragon Ball Z fan and you've not heard of Team 4 Star, you have got a lot of great content to catch up on. So that's Team 4 Star, as in the 4-star Dragon Ball, all one word. Now let's talk about something else TV related that I'm sure lots of my followers would rather have me talk about, and that is Doctor Who, and this is now a main topic for today. Now, I just want to stress this point. This is going to be... based on a Mirror article. The Mirror, the UK newspaper outlet. Now, the Mirror has a provable track record of just making shit up when it comes to Doctor Who. They don't name any of their sources, they just say whatever they want and just use it was an unnamed source or a source close to BBC to just essentially cover their asses, and 9 times out of 10 they are proven wrong. Like, I even remember, I used to be, when I was younger, when Doctor Who was like in series 2, 3 and 4, that I used to be a paperboy. And I would often read some of the rumours while going on my paper route, and I think it might have been The Sun, or maybe it was The Mirror, who said Ben Kingsley has been cast as Davros in Doctor Who Series 3, a source close to the production tells us. No, it never happened, because Davros wasn't in Series 3, he was in Series 4, and he was played by a much lesser known but equally talented actor, Julian Bell. So, yeah, when it comes to UK newspaper publications, they can just make shit up about Doctor Who and just get all of the clicks and the ad revenue. But while I do not know if this Mirror story is true, what I'll be doing with this Film Brits podcast is talking about the hypothetical scenario about it, like whether or not they actually should go in this direction. Now, for those of you who do not know, the Mirror was saying that unnamed insider sources, because of course they were unnamed insider sources, said that Peter Capaldi and Pearl Mackie will leave Doctor Who after Series 10, giving Chris Chibnall, who's going to be the new showrunner after Stephen Moffat does his final series next year, giving him, and I quote, an opportunity to start afresh for his first series. This is what the report says. The replacement Time Lord is likely to be played by a younger actor in a bid to help boost the flagging sales of dolls, books, DVDs and toys. Our sources say BBC management wants a return to the format from the David Tennant era, when you had a dashing male lead and young female companion. Merchandising has dropped off sharply in recent years, and there is a strong desire to boost the show's popularity among kids. Now, the interesting thing, when you tell a lie, not saying that the Mirror is lying, but I'm going somewhere with this. When you tell a lie, it has to be steeped in some sort of truth. And you know what? There's a little bit of truth here in that if the BBC wanted a quote-unquote clean slate with Doctor Who, after Stephen Moffat's next series, it would be the appropriate time to do it. And not just because it's a new showrunner, because Doctor Who didn't have a clean slate when Stephen Moffat took over, and the series didn't dip in viewership, it didn't dip in quality. It took a couple of years for that to happen. But the they didn't need a clean slate because, what was it called? The End of Time. Yes, The End of Time Part 2 and The 11th Hour, you could watch them back to back because they take place back to back. There is no clean slate here. The Doctor, the 11th Doctor, encounters Amelia Pond immediately after regenerating from David Tennant into Matt Smith. There is no clean slate here. It is one single continuity, so it can be done. It has been done, and in terms of the quality or in terms of the viewership, it has not dropped off. But when it comes to this scenario that we are in, we've kind of got to face some facts here. Now, I am not a fan of Stephen Moffat's output from the last 2 years. I've made that incredibly clear. I've backed up almost everything I've said and all of my opinions in my in-depth reviews and my in-depth reactions. You know my stance here. But in terms of the actual facts that you can't really argue with, the viewership is declining. And I think viewership is declining for TV kind of across the board. But for Doctor Who, with its basically the flagship British sci-fi show and one of the BBC's golden jewels, it shouldn't be dropping in viewership. And despite the fact that you've got Peter Capaldi, who is possibly one of the best actors to ever play the Doctor, he has just been saddled with a character who is not worthy of that talent. And I think the merchandising arm of the BBC is not what it used to be, and I think one reason for that is because there's not been nearly as much Doctor Who as there has been in the past couple of years, because you were guaranteed 13 episodes and a Christmas special for 3 years, and then what happened is that there would be this 3 to 4 month break between episode 7 and episode 8, and that would disjoint the viewership. That would have some really weird separation to kind of throw people off the hype train. And then you have a year-long hiatus. There's going to be no series in 2016, which there's not been nearly as much content for the BBC to merchandise with. No wonder that there are flagging sales of dolls, books, DVDs, and toys, because there's not been nearly as much source material there to merchandise. It makes a lot of sense. But let's just talk about what would happen if this was true, that if Peter Capaldi and Pearl Mackie, after one series, Pearl Mackie, just to emphasise, who's going to be playing as Bill, the new companion, Bill, her introductory teaser had her credited as Bill, which is really strange that they didn't have a space bar in that, so that's why myself and Billy Tracy from Five Who fans call her as Bill. She would have only had one series, and then bam, she's gone. Which kind of makes sense. It kind of throws Pearl Mackie under the bus, though, because if she is a terrific actor, she's cast in Doctor Who as the companion, she's got to be good. There's definitely got to be some potential and some promise there. But it would be massively disheartening if she loved the programme and that she wanted to stay for more, and that the character could have been fleshed out a lot more. But they think, no, with Chris Chibnall, let's just get somebody else in. I think Series 10 is maybe a series where you didn't even need a companion at all. I think it could have benefited from that. But that's not the direction they're going in, so I'm not going to elaborate there. And Peter Capaldi, he's a phenomenal world-class actor. And I think I mentioned this on my Facebook page. I mentioned this story. And Dimmy, who's another Doctor Who YouTuber, he said that after the Doctor was written in Series 9 with his Doctor Disco and his sonic sunglasses and his guitar and riding on top of a tank, he wouldn't mind if Peter Capaldi went. But I think that what we would need for Capaldi, if he was going to be staying on, would be a transformation in his personality. That he needs some sort of a darker shift. Like Sylvester McCoy, in his first series, he was a jokey prankster. He didn't really have much edge to him. He was kind of he's like a clown, a buffoon. It played to Sylvester McCoy's comedic and physical comedy, like Charlie Chaplin's strengths. But that wasn't really interesting. It wasn't really giving us much of a character to work with. However, in Series 2 and Series 3 of the Sylvester McCoy era, he became a much darker presence. Sylvester McCoy proved himself to be a really great dramatic actor and to have a really fierce on-screen presence, like Remembrance of the Daleks and the Happiness Patrol. Those are just some incredible stories that show off his darker edge, and the Happiness Patrol is one of the best examples of this, when the Doctor encounters the sniper on the rooftop, and the sniper is aiming his rifle at the Doctor, he's not backing down, and he's saying, yes, pull the trigger, end my life, end a life. And he talks the guy down through sheer intimidation. And the end of that story, when Helen A, who's the villain of the Happiness Patrol story, is trying to escape, and he confronts her, because the whole idea of the Happiness Patrol is that if anybody's sad, if they get arrested, there needs to be happiness in this city or on this planet, whichever it is. And the Doctor basically tries to convince her that happiness and sadness cannot exist away from each other. They're two sides of the same coin. They have to exist side by side with each other. And it's such a fierce performance, and Sylvester McCoy is brilliant. And then we get to Series 3, where he literally wears the darker clothing. He's got the darker jacket on. In what story was it? Was it Battlefield? I think it was Battlefield. When he had the coat on. Oh no, it was I can't remember the story, but he basically covered up his question mark jumper and wore a big dark brown coat, which looked awesome on him. So it was more like he was wearing physically darker clothing while also being a much darker character. And I think Peter Capaldi, to go off of this this massive tangent, he needs that sort of personality shift, and I think it would utilise Capaldi's strength as an actor, because some of his best moments have been his more intense sequences, such as almost the entirety of Heaven Sent, which is possibly his crowning performance in Doctor Who, but I still think that he could do better if the material allowed him to. But when we talk about a clean slate for Doctor Who, we know who's going to be thrown under the bus here, and it's going to be the talent on screen like Peter Capaldi and Pearl Mackie, because the only reason you really need a clean slate for Doctor Who is because of what Stephen Moffat has been doing to the programme for the past couple of years. And yeah, it's hard not to let my opinions kind of overwhelm the discussion or the conversation here, but let's not forget that for 2 seasons in a row with Death in Heaven and Hell Bent, Stephen Moffat essentially broke the universe beyond repair, because let's not forget that in Death in Heaven, the whole Don't Cremate Me in the Afterlife subplot basically confirmed that ever since the beginning of creation to the far-flung years of the future, that anybody who died in the universe went through a horrible, painful, grueling, torturous afterlife. And that's not me, that's not some sort of weird interpretation or some weird fan theory. That's something the episode flat out confirms and solidifies as canon. And then you've got the Brigadier, who also went through that, and all of basically every single one of the Doctor's companions. And let's not forget that when that character in Into the Dalek, I forgot her name, when she was killed, she went into the afterlife as well. So it is characters in the far future long after the events of the actual episode. Like, the afterlife didn't stop after 2014 in Death in Heaven, okay? That afterlife continued way into the future. And then with Hell Bent, we had the Doctor saving Clara by taking her from one heartbeat to the next, out of time, and basically robbing the entire universe of death. He made death his plaything, and now there's absolutely no reason for any character to die. And a franchise that had a very similar thing happen to it was the Star Trek movie franchise, because Star Trek Into Darkness also robbed the universe of death. Remember that there was weird. I'm not a big Trek fan, but I loved Star Trek Beyond. But those weird fluffy things, basically they used those to rob the universe of death as well as Khan's blood. So in the Star Trek universe, death is no longer an issue. So when Simon Pegg and his co-writer went to write Star Trek Beyond, they were asked about the events of Star Trek Into Darkness, and they basically said, they wrote us into a corner, and we basically have to ignore all of that. Even though it's kind of established in canon, we have to basically ignore the events of Star Trek Into Darkness. And that's another example of a science fiction series writing itself into a corner, breaking the universe beyond repair. And I think Doctor Who has written itself into a very similar situation. I say Doctor Who has written itself. Stephen Moffat has done it, because the other writers haven't been doing it. Toby Whithouse, Jamie Matheson, Peter Harness, Mark Gatiss, Sarah Gollard, Frank Cottrell Boyce, Gareth Roberts, Stephen... They've not done this. It has literally all been Stephen Moffat, or at least maybe his script editors, if they're bothering to control him or rein him in. Basically, all of the main problems can be attributed and diluted down to Stephen Moffat's writing style, and that's phenomenally disappointing. So when you have the events of Heaven Sent, Hellbent, and the events... let's not forget the Doctor's massively out-of-character shift from Heaven Sent to Hellbent, and just how terribly that whole mystery was handled. When you have all of that, you basically have a universe that has nowhere to go, that has basically imploded in on its own logic, and you need the clean slate now. Like, what happens is that Stephen Moffat was given this massive, glorious sandbox that was Doctor Who, and then he spent about 2 or 3 years breaking it and pooping and defecating all over the sandbox until it was unusable. What do? Do you try and salvage anything from the sandbox, or do you just demolish it and start fresh? And I think that Chris Chibnall really has no choice but to do the latter option. And because of that, it's going to be Peter Capaldi and Pearl Mackie that will be written out of the series, and Chris Chibnall will get the clean slate, and hopefully he'll be able to salvage the programme, because it has been alienating a lot of people. Not just me, but there's a lot of people who, families who just can't get into it because it's far too complicated for it. It's far too complicated for its own good. And complicated science fiction or complicated television is fine and people can really enjoy it if it's complexity with purpose. And there's no purpose in Doctor Who's complexity other than to have just artificial mysteries or to be complex. There's no substance underneath there, so it alienates audiences for no good reason. And I think one other Facebook comment was saying that hopefully that they're not, if they are doing this clean slate, that they're not doing it just to help the merchandising arm, because like the article says, they're hoping that it will boost flagging sales of dolls, books, DVDs and toys. But I think the BBC are a lot smarter than that. I think that they're not thinking, we need a younger actor to get more DVDs, toys and book sales. We need that. I think when you have something like Game of Thrones, which audiences love and is critically acclaimed and millions and millions and millions of people watch it, then they love the show, they want the merchandise, they want the books, they want the Funko Pops, they want the calendars, they want the figurines, they want the collectibles, because they love the show. And because the critical and audience consensus of Doctor Who has been on the wane for the past few years, you lose the enthusiasm and then you lose the merchandising sales. And I think what the BBC, hopefully, fingers crossed, acknowledge is that because people haven't been enjoying the show, they've not been buying the merchandise, and when people love the show, they're much more likely to buy the merchandise. So hopefully the increasing quality that could hopefully come with Chris Chibnall's clean slate will improve merchandise sales. Hopefully that's the approach they're going for. As for younger actors, it completely makes sense that they want to return to the David Tennant era, because that was basically the peak of popularity for Doctor Who, at least in this country. It was really with Matt Smith and Stephen Moffat's approach to getting American actors and setting stories in America and making Doctor Who big stateside, made it bigger worldwide. But in terms of the UK popularity, it really was the David Tennant era. That's probably the best thing that Stephen Moffat has done, apart from Series 5 and 6 Part 1. He made the show a much bigger event worldwide, and he also made the 50th anniversary a huge event. We cannot deny that of Stephen Moffat. He did a great job in terms of making the show bigger worldwide and a big promotional arm for the BBC, but in terms of the quality, it has been flagging. And I don't think a younger actor is necessarily going to change that if the writing approach doesn't change, because then you'll just get Peter Capaldi is not the problem. The problem is the way that the character's written. It's the way the stories are structured. It's the BBC's weird schedule with it, and the fact that they just don't really seem to want to commit to a series for a year. It's kind of been a mess for a couple of years. But because there hasn't been that massive passion behind the program from the fan base, at least not as much as it used to be. The passionate fan base is still there, but because they're not quite as vocal, because the series hasn't been as good, it's been harder to justify it. And also, when you make something so needlessly complicated, you alienate the younger audience, and it's the younger audience who will be buying the merch. Well, they won't be buying it. They'll be convincing their parents to buy it, which is just as important. So, who should be the Doctor if they're going for a younger actor? I don't think they should go for Eddie Redmayne, which on the same day that this Mirror story came out, Ed Redmayne told BBC Radio 1 that he would love to be the Doctor, but he's already played the Doctor. He played him in the movie Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, which was such a shameless Matt Smith Doctor Who ripoff, from the mannerisms, from his hairstyle, to the fact that his main object that he has in the movie is something that is much bigger on the inside than it is on the outside, and that's his suitcase. So maybe not, because he's already played him. And I'd like to see they're going for a younger actor. I would cast James Nesbitt. I just think after the work he did on Jekyll and I guess the incredible body of work that he has behind him, he would be an incredible Doctor. I think he'd be amazing. I think I can imagine James Nesbitt with some of the best Peter Capaldi material and just hitting it out of the frickin' park. I don't really have a suggestion for a younger Doctor. If they were to go for a female Doctor, I'd probably go for someone like Saran Jones. And while she has played a character in Doctor Who in the past, she was Idris in The Doctor's Wife. They've done casting like that before. Like Colin Baker played a Time Lord before he appeared as the Sixth Doctor. Karen Gillan and Freema Agyeman had played characters before they were actually introduced. In fact, they found a way to include Freema Agyeman's inclusion in Army of Ghosts as just saying that was Martha Jones's sister. Oh no, cousin. It was her cousin, sorry. Adiola, that was her name. And they talk about her in Smith and Jones. That was actually quite a nice throwback. So in terms of casting, I really couldn't suggest much more. I don't know, because the best thing about casting for Doctor Who is that they never go for like the big Tom Hiddlestons or Tom Hardy or Daniel Craig or Eddie Redmayne. They do go for the smaller names, or like the smaller but just as talented, like maybe even more so names, and that's where a lot of the excitement and the mystery comes from. And as for Doctor Who's clean slate, I think after what Stephen Moffat's been doing with the programme for the past few years, you really have no choice but to have a clean slate. And as depressing as that sounds, it might just be at the expense of Peter Capaldi and Pearl Mackie, who has yet to prove herself. And I hope she does a terrific job. I also heard that Class is very good, although after a couple of weeks, Class has kind of dropped off the map in terms of its of the audience's reactions to it. I've not seen an episode of Class yet. I've been far too busy, and that's really, really depressing. I've been so busy I've not been able to watch the latest Doctor Who spin-off, but I think once all the episodes are out, if they are already out, I need to double check. I might try and marathon them and do like a marathon of reactions and maybe do one a day or something. So we'll see how that goes. And will Doctor Who be changing tone, or will it be doing having late in the game improvements for Series 10? Well, if the return of Dr. Mysterio teaser from Children in Need is any indication, we're in for a really rough 2017. So yeah, that's my thoughts on Doctor Who's clean slate. Like I've got to stress that it's a Mirror article. It's almost provably wrong, but because of the Mirror's track record. But I'm more speaking of the hypothetical. If they did have a clean slate, I would not be surprised. And to be honest, I kind of think that after Series 10 and the Christmas special, it needs a clean slate. I think that the BBC know it as well. Whether or not this is actually true, I think that we need an entirely new approach when Chris Chibnall comes along. I just don't want it to be at the expense of Peter Capaldi, who has given so much to the programme, as well as just being a constant part of the community. Like, he's always attending the conventions, he's always filming videos for fans, and like doing marriage proposal videos and stuff. He's just been an absolute dream for the programme, and I just wish that the material in Series 10 will be worthy of his talent, because he is a world-class actor. Okay, now it's time to move on to the listener question portion of the Film Brits podcast, and this is when our lovely patrons who support this show financially and also keep the lights on here at Trilbee Reviews ask questions, film-related questions, or anything, basically whatever they want to ask, and I will answer as best as I can, and I'll try and give decent answers as well. Let's see how we can go. And in order to get a question in on the Film Brits podcast in this way, if you just go to www.patreon.com/Trilbee, and if you pledge more than $10 a month, then you can suggest any topic, you can suggest anything to be talked about in depth on the podcast. So let's get the ball rolling. George asks, what are your thoughts and experience of anime? Can either be television series or movies. Do you have any favourite films, series or studios, e.g. Studio Ghibli in particular? My experience on anime is very mainstream. I'm not going to say, I was into Afro Samurai, I was into all of this really like cult stuff. No, I was very mainstream in the 90s. Stuff like Pokemon, Digimon, Yu-Gi-Oh, Beyblades, kind of all the big merchandising arm programs of the 90s and the early 2000s. That was my big introduction into anime, mainly Pokemon. I also think I might have watched Digimon like the day before I first watched Pokemon, but Pokemon was I preferred the show personally. but the big one was, like, probably as I mentioned at the beginning of this podcast, was Dragon Ball Z. I only very recently have watched Dragon Ball. And while I prefer Z, it's mainly down to nostalgia, because you can't really compare Dragon Ball to Dragon Ball Z apart from some of the characters, because they're going for completely different approaches and styles and tones. And of course the budget and the animation is a lot more bigger and a lot more elaborate for Dragon Ball Z. But yeah, Dragon Ball Z was like one of my favourite programs growing up as a kid, and I just massively enjoyed it. And it was one reason why I'm so disappointed that Dragon Ball Super has just phenomenally just dropped the ball. But as for anime films, I do watch the Studio Ghibli films. I love Spirited Away. Probably the last one I saw in theatres was The Wind Rises, because I've been meaning to check out when Marnie was there. That's out on DVD. I'm going to watch it before the end of the year so I can see if it's worthy of my top 10 best or top 10 worst list. But I've heard great things about when Marnie was there. In terms of anime that I'm watching now, like I said, I stopped watching Dragon Ball Super maybe like 30-40 episodes in. I mentioned this like a few episodes ago in the podcast. It was during the Champa World Tournament arc where I just the show just completely lost me. I also watch Attack on Titan, although I'm only like maybe like halfway through series 1. It's on Netflix. I've been meaning to watch more of it. I've just not really had the time, which is depressing. And I've also watched all of series 1 of One Punch Man, which is just an incredibly fun, engaging show, and I really hope that they do make a live action movie out of that one day, because I actually think that's a really great send up of superhero movies and superhero source material. Yeah, I also just love everything about One Punch Man, from the animation to the character designs to the action sequences and the final episode. It's got a real heart to it, One Punch Man, as well, because for those of you who don't know, One Punch Man is about Saitama, who is this guy who is so powerful he can defeat basically everyone he comes across in one punch. And he doesn't just beat them, he just completely destroys them. His power is on an absolute other level. And a lot of the drama actually comes from the fact that many of the other heroes don't take him seriously, because he's so ridiculously overpowered that people think that he cheats, that he's like maybe an alien, or he's abusing drugs or stuff like that. And I think the final episode of One Punch Man, because he finally encounters somebody who might just be on his level, but the way that they upend that and the ultimate moral of Saitama's story is actually really clever, really endearing, and it just shows that Saitama is not a hero because of his pure strength, but because of the type of person that he is. And it's just an incredibly great story. And I want to thank my Movie Mania co-host Bandit Incorporated for introducing me to One Punch Man, because yeah, I'm so glad he talked about it, because that got me into it. So yeah, in terms of anime, yeah, really mainstream. Yu-Gi-Oh! Was something I absolutely loved as well in the 90s, although Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds or Zexal or whatever. I watched Yu-Gi-Oh! GX, but it wasn't nearly as good as the original Yu-Gi-Oh! Series, and also I think the final season or the final 2 seasons were never dubbed in English, so I never got further than where the English dub ended. So yeah, it's a mainstream answer, but yeah, that's basically what I've been watching. As for studios, yeah, Studio Ghibli's the one. I've yet to watch Akira or Ghost in the Shell, though. I'm going to try and watch Ghost in the Shell before the live-action movie comes out. The trailer looks good for that, though. I do have a big gap in my viewing knowledge of anime movies, like some of the more bigger, more famous ones, so I'm going to try and rectify that in the coming weeks and months. So next question comes from Sir Dean Jones. With Casino Royale turning 10 years old this month, blimey. What has been your favourite moments of Daniel Craig's era as 007? The torture sequence is an iconic one, and anything from Skyfall is gold. I don't just want to go straight to the action sequences, but that sequence in Casino Royale, the parkour chase, is just phenomenally done. And who's the director? Martin Campbell. He did an incredible job with that sequence, and when they're fighting on top of the cranes in the construction yard, how he crashes through the wall, I think it's incredibly well done. The guy throws the gun at Bond. Bond catches it and throws it right back. Casino Royale is it's maybe not the best James Bond movie, but it's one of the best action movies of the past decade. I think it's incredibly well done. Daniel Craig has really proven himself to be a great James Bond. let's think of other iconic moments. Quantum of Solace is not a great film, but I think that while the speedboat chase is really good in it, and I think even though they are clearly trying to recapture the parkour sequence from Casino Royale, the fight sequence that apes it in Quantum of Solace is still really well done, and it's got one hell of an ending when he's attached to the ropes and he swings around and shoots the guy. It looked amazing in the trailer, and it looks amazing in the film as well. Anything from Skyfall is gold, particularly Roger Deakins' sublime cinematography, and he was robbed of an Oscar that year. It went to Life of Pi that year, and it really should have gone to Deakins for Skyfall, because that is the best looking Bond film, and it was the best looking film of 2012, like hands down. It's not even close. I think Spectre has a lot of merit to it, and I think I think it's an underrated Bond film, but I can completely understand many people's problems with it. I think that it is time for Bond to go back to just general missions and adventures and fighting, as opposed to these big personal character studies of Bond as a character and how everything relates back to his past and his parents and his brother and all of this stuff. I think it is time for the franchise to move on. But one sequence I think really kind of solidifies Skyfall's success and how Bond has found his place in the current pop culture lexicon is the sequence in Skyfall when he's in the London Underground and Javier Bardem's character is making his way to M, who's giving a speech, is it at the House of Parliament? And she reads a poem from Tennyson. The music during the Tennyson sequence is amazing as well. But the sequence that really sticks out to me is when he's in the underground and Javier Bardem is dressed up as a police officer, and he manages to try and he's hiding in the crowds. He's hiding in the London Underground, and I think it's really clever how the filmmakers put the villain in friendly clothing. Like, a police officer in the London Underground should be a safe thing. It should be something that we should partially feel comfortable about when we're in the underground, because it can't be a coincidence that there's a lot of CCTV footage shots in the underground sequence in Skyfall, and all of these crowded places in the London Underground, which only 5 years, was it 5 years? What year was it? It was the 7/7 bombings. 2005, sorry, it wasn't, it was 7 years previously, the 7/7 bombings, where some suicide bombing attacks happened in the London Underground on the 7th of July 2005 by 4 Islamic extremists. And when Bond leaves the underground and he sees all the ambulances around and all the civilians and all the people in high vis jackets and all of the authorities, it's directly taking shots from that, footage and photos that were all over the media for the days following the 7/7 bombings. And what Skyfall did with that single sequence was kind of tap into an insecurity that isn't often looked at in film, because in the wake of 9/11 there were a lot of films trying to take that iconography, not the least of which Man of Steel, where the destruction of Metropolis basically draws just pure 9/11 parallels and iconography and shots and moments and such. 9/11 had become such a huge thing in media that when Skyfall came along and aped the 7/7 bombings, not many people picked up on it, but I'm sure that it was subliminal in many people. And Skyfall it was like the highest grossing film in UK history before Star Wars The Force Awakens came from. And I think it was the perfect film at the perfect time, in that it took people's insecurities about surveillance and about hackers from the other side of the because do you need a man with a gun when people can just disassemble empires from a laptop, like Ben Whishaw, who's brilliant as Q, he says he's able to do in his pajamas before his first cup of Earl Grey in the morning. Do you need that? And it was also the 50th anniversary of Bond, and the London Olympics were that year. It was the perfect year, it was the perfect time, and it was coming in the perfect context in terms of Britain's insecurities. And that's kind of how I will remember Skyfall, being that perfect film at that perfect time. And then when Spectre couldn't do that a few years later, because no follow-up to Skyfall possibly could, people were very disappointed. But that underground sequence from Skyfall, and not to mention the spectacular train moment when it just crashes through the wall, that's brilliant stuff. So that's my answer, Dean. And of course, the torture sequence. To the right! It's wonderful. Next question comes from Lizzie Gravel. What actress would you pick to be the first female Doctor? I feel bad because I kind of mentioned this earlier, but I'll elaborate a bit more. Saran Jones would be my choice. The thing about a character like the Doctor is that you would need... Matt Smith was kind of a lightning in a bottle choice, because he's a guy in his mid to late 20s who was somehow able to capture being a 1,000-year-old Time Lord. That's not easy to do, even remotely, and the fact he was able to do that is just an absolute credit to his talent as an actor, and I hope he has an incredible career ahead of him. And I think with someone like the Doctor, you may need a actor or an actress with a bit more mileage on them. I'm not saying you get like Maggie Smith, who's 80, 90 years old. I'm not saying you get that. But I think you don't go for the young eye candy 20-year-old actress to play the first female Doctor. I think you get someone like Saran Jones, who's in her late 30s, I believe. If you've seen Dr. Foster, you know that she can go to some very dark places, and she's great in Scott and Bailey. She was great in Doctor Who when she played the Doctor's wife. She played the Mona Lisa in the Sarah Jane Adventures as well. I just remembered that. She is just an incredible talent, and I think that she is able to show the dark aspects of the character, and also she's just an incredibly talented person. Other female actresses, one issue with film is that by the time you reach the age of 30, you're probably going to be written out of many roles, and then some other person in their early 20s is going to be taking your place. Like Jennifer Lawrence, unless she does some incredibly clever career moves, her career could be over in 5 years, because the next quirky person in their early 20s is just going to be standing in line waiting to take her place. But for TV, which goes for a much more diverse audience and is trying to represent the audience who watch it much more efficiently than film does, you're not going to have that problem. There's going to be a huge amount of actresses of various ages who could possibly play the Doctor. If you just look at movie stars, you are going to inevitably get a lot younger in terms of realistic choices. You could say Meryl Streep as the Doctor, but that's never going to happen in a million years. So I think someone like Saran Jones is a much more realistic choice, but you could take any incredibly talented actress from the age of, say, 30 to 50, or maybe 30 to 60, depending on where you wanted to go with the character, or what you wanted to say, or what type of physicality you would demand from the scripts. But Saran Jones really is my choice. I think that she has absolutely proven herself. She's been great in Doctor Who in the past, and it might even be interesting thematically if the next Doctor takes the form of the TARDIS. I think that would be a really nice interplay in a direction that we've never seen the programme take before. I'd be really interested in seeing that. So yeah, Saran Jones is my choice. So next question comes from Winter. Marvel has recently announced that their planned Inhumans film will be a TV series. My question is, what advantage does a TV series have compared to a film, and how does the use of relative unknowns, such as the Inhumans, Legion, Green Arrow, etc., in successful TV series affect the comic landscape? I'll go for the first question first. What advantage does a TV series have compared to a film? Time is really the key advantage, because TV series may not have the budget of films, for the most part, but with a TV series you have hours and hours to flesh out these characters. You can also play with the idea of having one 10-hour story or 10 one-hour stories with a TV series. As long as you are able to pace it appropriately, if you don't do, say, like a Daredevil or Jessica Jones or a Luke Cage, where you really could tell this story in 10 episodes and not 13, or in the case of Luke Cage, you could tell that in 6 or 7 episodes, it's that poorly paced, then you can have an incredibly gripping series on your hands. And also, when you have when you have a much longer series, it can maybe encourage binge watching, and you also get increased audience investment, because one reason that we're so invested in, say, characters in the Marvel Cinematic Universe like Tony Stark or Captain America or Spider-Man is because we spend hours and hours with them, whereas you get a natural weight in history just because of the amount of time that you were literally spending with them. One reason so many people were weeping at the end of Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2 is because we'd spent our entire childhoods with these characters, and one reason the ending of Toy Story 3 was so effective for many people at the right age who were hit at the right time was because we were seeing Woody, Buzz and Jessie and all these characters potentially die in an incredibly horrifying furnace. And we'd spent our childhood with these characters, and when you get TV, you can do that, but much more regularly. It's not very often you get a franchise that can do that. Like you do have the MCU, or you have Harry Potter, or you have Toy Story, but in the context of every film ever made ever, that is a fraction of a percent. So yeah, time. When you have a limited budget, you also are forced to maybe be a bit more creative, maybe try different art styles, or maybe try different aesthetics, try different... you're also more likely to use practical effects as well, which also helps for horror shows like, say, Penny Dreadful or Hannibal. And I think when you have a TV series, when you have a lower budget, you can also... it forces you to delve deeper into characters. Like when you have people who can't get into massive elaborate fight scenes every 20 to 25 minutes, you have to force them to talk. And it also, writing for TV is really what separates the men from the boys. Like TV series for TV had a stigma against it for a while, where it was just where the cheap trash went. But now we're in a golden age of television, like with Game of Thrones and Dexter, or and just the list goes on and on. Where TV is the place to be, and there's a lot of money in TV now, and because people are just getting so attached to shows like Game of Thrones or Doctor Who, or just off the top of my head trying to think of the reason I can't think of one is because there are so many. It's tough to hone in on one, like Dexter as well, Hannibal, Penny Dreadful. Trying to think of other long running ones that I got, like Westworld as well is hopefully going to be the next big thing for HBO. Where was I going with that point? But yeah, TV is in a new golden age at the moment, and movies are actually having to catch up because they're exploring characters so well and so in depth that movies are having to try and up their game if they want that sort of emotional investment in their characters. Movies have their own advantages too. Like just having a story that you are able to complete in one sitting has its advantages in terms of reaching a mainstream audience or hitting somebody hard and fast. And also you get the increased budget, you get the increased star power, you get the profitability factor, whereas say like a movie can make $1 billion in its theatrical run, you're not going to make $1 billion in advertising for one series over TV series. You may make that over time with multiple series as well as a lot of merchandising, but you're not going to make that in one theatrical run. So you're not going to make that in one series on its first try. It's going to take like decades of syndication to make that amount, if it ever does. But of course, like TV is a lot cheaper as well, so it kind of balances out. It's a weirdly equal playing field in its own relative context. But your second question, Winter, how does the use of relative unknowns such as the Inhumans, Legion, Green Arrow, how does it affect the comic landscape? I don't really know, in terms of, it's tough to think of this question outside of my bubble, because I know who the Inhumans are, I know who Green Arrow is, I know about Legion. But, so when they make a TV series, I already know what I'm in for. I already know who they are before going into it, and I know to look out for it, and I know that it could be part of this other universe depending on how they play it. But in terms of how they affect the comic landscape, it might be tough for an Inhuman series to reach a market beyond the already converted. It depends on how they market it, or how they approach it, or how they release it. That's a tough question. How do they affect the comic landscape? I guess it's a way to say, oh, Green Arrow works in live action, we've made the aesthetic work, we've got these great characters, and also people are coming back for multiple series like they do with Green Arrow. So maybe there is mileage if we want to make him appear in a movie, or if we want to spin off the Arrow franchise, or if we wanted to try a new animated series, or include him in another thing. I think that the use of relative unknowns in the TV landscape are able to work as a a relatively low risk but high reward testing ground. Like Daredevil was not going to be getting another movie after the Ben Affleck one before 2013, 2014, but after the first Netflix series was a massive hit for Netflix and was a huge critical success, that's actually something people are wanting and something that is now on the cards. Daredevil has got an increased visibility now, ironically, in terms of how he's viewed by the public, because a few years ago people couldn't care less about Daredevil. Now people love Daredevil. So I think it's using relative unknowns as a good testing ground to see how you can expand them for future endeavours, but how they expand is ultimately up to the creators, and it is ultimately a case-by-case basis. It does sound like a cop-out answer, but that really is kind of the only way to approach it. When you, like, the Inhumans and Arrow, you can't really compare. It's apples and oranges. It's like comparing the X-Men and Hawkeye. That's actually quite a good comparison, really. Comparing the X-Men and Hawkeye. They're both going to be doing very different things with their own series, so how they expand beyond their first series or their first TV foray is going to be up to how they're received and how they want to play it later on. Okay, Edward Sweet asks, would you rather question, you're strapped to a chair with lid locks, Clockwork Orange style, and you're forced to watch either the Twilight Saga Breaking Dawn Parts 1 and 2 as a double feature, or both Amazing Spider-Man movies back to back, with no way to commit suicide. Which do you choose? Oh my goodness. Okay, I would pick the Amazing Spider-Man films. Because I gave Twilight Saga Breaking Dawn Part 1 a 1 out of 10, and I gave Part 2 a 0 out of 10, whereas I gave The Amazing Spider-Man 1 a 3, or I think I gave it a 3 or a 4 out of 10, and I gave The Amazing Spider-Man 2 a 0 out of 10. The numbers are just better, and the first installments are just better as well. But at least with the Amazing Spider-Man movies, there's like bright colours. Even if I don't think the action or the effects or anything is any good about those films, I can at least appreciate the colours, whereas with Breaking Dawn it's just so flatly directed. And also, let's just not forget that Breaking Dawn Part 1 and 2 is the absolute worst when it comes to social commentary, like how it approaches the issue of say abortion, or about marriage, or relationships. It's just insidiously thought out and just clear abstinence propaganda, and it's terribly, terribly done. And let's not forget that Breaking Dawn Part 2 literally just ends with a massive cop-out. Its entire ending is predicated on the fact that it's just a massive double fake. Whereas at least Amazing Spider-Man 2 or The Amazing Spider-Man doesn't have that, even if The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is just an absolute phenomenal failure. And at least when watching The Amazing Spider-Man 2 and just watching all of this stuff get set up, I can take some weird glee in the fact that it is never going to pay off and that these filmmakers are not going to be rewarded for these terrible, terrible story choices. So I wouldn't want to watch either double feature, but if for some reason I had to and I couldn't commit suicide, it would have to be the Amazing Spider-Man double feature. At least Amazing Spider-Man 1 has a couple of redeeming elements to it. And to be fair, the Amazing Spider-Man 1 and Twilight, quite similar films anyway, so pick your poison. And the final question comes from Zachary Taylor. Will you be watching the animated Doctor Who Power of the Dalek story when it comes out? Also, is there any Doctor Who episodes where you thought it's not as good as people made it out to be, or anywhere it's not as bad as people made it out to be? Also, what is your favourite version of the Doctor Who theme? Mine is the first one. I'll take those questions one at a time. Will you be watching the animated Power of the Dalek story when it comes out? It is out on DVD now. I have not yet checked it out. I really want to, though. I've heard that Power of the Daleks is a very, very good story. I've seen certain clips of it, and I've heard certain audio clips of it, and I think that it's great that the BBC were able to put together an animated restoration of it, because all of the footage was lost decades ago and thought to have just been... it is still lost, but the fact that they've been able to use modern technology and been able to animate over the audio that still survives, I think is a perfect compromise. I think it's a great way to introduce the story to a new generation of people, and I think it's just a great way to preserve. And I think that Doctor Who losing a lot of those stories in the BBC purges of the 60s and 70s is a good lesson for the future for them to preserve. And there's a lot of organisations out there now when it comes to films and TV and games who actually make an effort to preserve original film stocks and to preserve their original formats for not just for restoration and upkeep, but just like a slice of history, so that people can revisit these things and learn. I think it's a great life lesson as well. The Power of the Daleks is meant to be a great story, and I'm really looking forward to watching it. I am planning to watch it. Also, the next question, is there any Doctor Who episodes where, basically, are there any stories that are overrated or underrated? Is the nuts and bolts of the question. When it comes to underrated stories, I think stories like 42, Sleep No More, I'm trying to stay away from the from the new series, trying to go back to older ones. I think that Planet of Fire is surprisingly good. I think there were some really good moments in that. Trying to go back, let's look back. I'm just going through a list of all of the stories now. I think that the Invasion of Time is good for the first 4 episodes. Then when the Sontarans show up, it does become a completely different story. Pyramids of Mars, no, that's not underrated. That's got the perfect level of appreciation in that it's absolutely amazing. I think Unearthly Child, people are like, oh, it's a really good story because it's the first one and it's the first story, so it's got some grandfather clause to it. But no, Unearthly Child is a legitimately great story. Like, it really holds up. It's really scary in some places. The first episode where they do discover the TARDIS in the junkyard it's genuinely good television. I think that the Dalek Invasion of Earth is overrated. I don't think it's a very good story. I think it's about 3-4 episodes too long. What else have we got here? Let's go back to the current series. I think that anything by Chris Chibnall is kind of underrated. Like, I think Cold Blood and The Hungry Earth are good stories. I think The Power of Three is good until the last 10-15 minutes when it's clear that it was hacked together in the editing room. I think A Good Man Goes to War still holds up incredibly well, even if Let's Kill Hitler and the plots that it was insinuating just didn't really come to pass the way they needed to. And yeah, in terms of stories that I think are overrated, basically anything that Stephen Moffat has been nominated or won a Hugo Award for the past couple of years, with the exception of Heaven Sent, which Heaven Sent is brilliant, I'm not going to lie, but the fact that Hellbent goes out of its way to negate almost everything about it really leaves a sour taste in my mouth. What else is there? I think Face the Raven, people give that a lot of credit because of how it killed off Clara, but I think that it's only really noteworthy for its last 10 to 15 minutes, and the story is bending itself over backwards to get to that conclusion so poorly that it really loses sight of the rest of the plot. What else have we got? I think a story... Yeah, Time Heist is actually pretty good as well. I almost forgot about Time Heist. That's a good one. I think that Warriors of the Deep is an incredibly bad story. It's really, really bad, and it's almost responsible single-handedly for the series going into hiatus a couple of years later. But my God, is it enjoyable to watch. I think that story is a glorious watch, and for all of the wrong reasons. What else have we got? I think Two Doctors isn't too bad either. It's needlessly violent at points. Same for Attack of the Cybermen. Actually, that probably goes for a lot of season 22, like Colin Baker's first proper series. A lot of needless violence, but I really do enjoy it. And what else? Happiness Patrol isn't talked about enough. I really like Happiness Patrol. People also seem to really like Planet of the Dead. I've never really seen the appeal. I don't think it's a particularly great story. Like, it's not bad, and I kind of like the idea of those stingrays destroying the planet and turning it into a desert. But I think Michelle Ryan in that role I think she's terrible in the story. I think she's really, really poor in it. I think it's one of David Tennant's weakest performances because he's given so little to work with. I'm not a fan of Lee Evans' comedy. I'm not a fan of him in the episode either. I think A Planet of the Dead it's noteworthy for being like the 200th episode or whatever it was, but it's not a fan. Not a fan of Planet of the Dead. In fact, the more I think about it, the less I like it. So yeah, those are just the smallest of overrated and underrated ones, just off the top of my head. The Crimson Horror. I remember very little about it. I need to revisit the Crimson Horror, actually. And the final question from Zachary Taylor was, what is your favourite version of the Doctor Who theme? Mine is the very first one. Yeah, that's actually a really good shout, actually. I think that's a really good adaptation. It's the original adaptation of the theme. What am I on about? It's the original version, and it's really haunting. I love the misty sound effects. I think it really does look great on screen. It sounds great as well. But favourite version of the Doctor Who theme? I don't have a favourite version, but I think that each version of the theme kind of works for the time that it came out at. Like, the Doctor Who theme kind of stayed consistent until the late 70s, early 80s, when it went for a much more science fiction, much more colourful tone, and when it's like in the last season or two of Tom Baker era and then the Peter Davison era. I think the Trial of a Time Lord adaptation of the theme is pretty good. I like the Sylvester McCoy theme. I like the Doctor Who movie theme. I love the Murray Gold orchestrated version that has such power and energy to it. I even like the Matt Smith version of the theme. And while I do like the Peter Capaldi theme, I think that the visuals that accompany it are pretty pants. I'm not a fan of that. So I like all of the themes, really. I don't really have a particular favourite one. I kind of wish that in the next time trailers they would still use the theme tune. Like, I think the last time they did it was for The Beast Below or for the 11th hour. Oh no, it was for Victory of the Daleks, I think. I think that was the very last time they did it. I wish they'd still do it, but hey, who am I to say? But I'm interested to know, I'd like to see another composer take a crack at it. I think Murray Gold has done wonders for the series, and I think he's done incredible music. But I would like to see a new regular composer take over the mantle if there is going to be a clean slate. And I'd like to see a new composer take a stab at the theme tune, because Murray Gold has had like 5 cracks at it, and they've all been good. But let's see what somebody else does with it now. Let's see if somebody can basically take the exact same nuts and bolts and the notes of it and try and create something new with it and give it maybe a new lease on life. But the first theme, that's a good shout. And if I think anyone could argue that any version of the theme is their favourite, and I would say, yep, I can see the arguments there. I see the legit points there. Let's just say, just for fun, the Sylvester McCoy theme, because that awesome explosion that it begins and ends with, that's a good way to start some TV. Okay, folks, and now before my voice decides to completely die and break out, because I've been talking for like an hour and a quarter non-stop if the recording Audacity software is to be believed, let's go for the lightning round. Basically, I put a shout out on Twitter asking for questions, and I have 60 seconds to answer them. And I've just gone on my Twitter, I've got 15 notifications. I may have to make this a bit easier. Right. Oh, okay. That's made things slightly easier. Foxy has asked 3 or 4 questions, so I'll only answer one of those. But okay, let's just. Okay, let's go. 3, 2, 1, go. Kyle Snape asks, how do you think that the DC Extended Universe can improve with films to come following the poor reception of Suicide Squad and Batman v Superman? Don't think that tone is the issue here. Tone is not the issue. The issue that Warner Brothers and DC need to improve with is the scripts. They need to actually write good characters. They need to have an understanding of the source material. And it's easy to say, let's write good scripts, right? That's easier said than done. But that really is the main issue here. The screenplays for Batman v Superman and Suicide Squad just were not very good. They were mishandled. They were poorly plotted. They were badly thought out. The characterization is terrible at best. So that's basically what needs to be done. They just need to have a screenplay that actually holds up on, not even under repeated viewings, under one viewing. That's all they really need, and then they'll really be progressing, in my opinion. Okay, next question. 3, 2, 1, go. Peter Corman asks, do you think if the Fantastic Beasts screenplay sells well, we might get more day-and-date screenplay releases? That's an interesting question. I think that they should be releasing far more screenplays than they actually do. And I hope the Fantastic Beasts screenplay sells well and reflects that. I don't know if there would be more, if we'll be getting more day-and-date screenplay releases, screenplays that are released on the same day because of maybe fear of spoilers or something, especially say Captain America Civil War came out in the UK a week before it did in America. You don't want those spoilers going out online or anything. But I think maybe when something comes out on DVD or Blu-ray, if you say you buy the Blu-ray for $14.99 and then you get the screenplay half price with it, I would drop money almost all of the time for something like that. I buy the screenplay for The Martian, for Civil War, for Mad Max. And I hope that maybe if the screenplay does sell well, it will convince movie distributors and companies to maybe start releasing more. I just think we need more screenplays if we want to teach people how to write screenplays. That was 1 minute and 1 second. Went slightly over, but kind of had to be done. Okay, this is the only question from Foxy that I'm going to answer, because Foxy asked multiple ones. So 3, 2, 1, go. Pick Inception or Interstellar. I'm going to pick Inception. Inception. I like Interstellar. I think that it's visually arresting and beautiful, and there's some great performances and great ideas in there. But Inception is just much more well thought out. I think it's got the better sequences, the music's better, the concepts is better. The ending holds up much better than the ending of Interstellar does. And I think if Interstellar feels like Christopher Nolan trying really, really hard to make a Steven Spielberg movie, but it just doesn't really have the handle of emotions that Steven Spielberg does. And I think Inception is a much more cold and calculated Christopher Nolan movie, and Inception is basically Christopher Nolan showing us, the viewer, how he views structure and formatting in a movie. And I think it's a great Christopher Nolan movie because of that. I think my voice is starting to give out, and I've got a bit of a cold and I'm bunked up, so I'll only do one more. Okay, ready? 3, 2, 1, go. Richard McGee asks, do you think there should be a future Bond villain within the James Bond franchise based on President Donald Trump? This is going to be precarious ground, because Donald Trump has made a habit of threatening to sue almost everyone who has a bad word to say about him. Like, there was the musical, I forget what its name is, my head hurts, who peacefully asked the future VP Mike Pence to, be a compassionate human being, and Donald Trump was like, you must apologize, he was harassed, they were terrible. And Donald Trump, the failed businessman that he is, probably will never sue any of the people who he threatens to sue, but I think history is going to go down as history will view Donald Trump as somebody who, his first few days and weeks as being president-elect, he'll just be continually attacking and threatening the First Amendment. So I think you're going to have to wait until the end of his presidency before you do anything like that. But my God, the guy is such a caricature and such a Bond villain anyway that it's basically inevitable that maybe in a couple of decades' time that is going to happen. Okay, I went slightly over, but that was the final question. So, unfortunately, I cannot really keep up anymore with the lightning round for this episode. My voice is probably going to give out. I can't really talk much more on my own for an hour. And also, I feel really bunged up because of this blooming cold, mid-November weather. So thank you very much for listening to the Film Brits podcast. I've been Trilbee. If you would like to support this podcast financially, you can go on my Patreon, www.patreon.com/Trilbee. You can subscribe to this podcast via SoundCloud or on iTunes, and if you subscribe on iTunes, please feel free to leave a review or to rate. And also, don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel, Trilbee Reviews, and also visit my website, www.trilbee.com. Thank you so much for listening to me on Film Brits, and I shall see you folks next time.